Hello everybody and welcome to another whiskey comparison video. I'm Drew Hanisch and this week I am going to be tasting Old Forester's 100 proof, and I'm also going to be tasting Yellowstone, and we're going to talk a little bit about history as well because both of these bottles have some history, and something interesting happened in the whiskey industry this week. There was a brand of bourbon that shifted from one owner to another. Now, Old Forester is owned by Brown-Forman, started by George Garvin Brown, and he is actually, the reason this is called signature is because he used to put his signature on every label to prove its quality back around 1870 when that started. And actually, Brown-Forman used to own Early Times. Now, Early Times is a new whiskey in my collection. I have never ever bought a bottle of this, and I think mainly because when you read about this, even though it has a lot of history, it basically tells you that this is aged in oak, and it is only aged, what it says here, matured at least 36 months in reused cooperage, which in English means that it's spent 3 years in a used bourbon barrel. Now, I'm not going to necessarily say that putting it in a used bourbon barrel is a bad thing, because I love Scotch, and Scotch is put into used bourbon barrels, and it does quite nicely, thank you. So, anyway, I just kind of avoided this for a while, but what's interesting is that it moved. The label is now with Sazerac, who makes Buffalo Trace. If you know anything about Buffalo Trace products, they go on allocation, meaning they're scarce, and so they can be hard to find. So I thought, well, maybe I need to go buy myself a bottle. I think the one that everybody talks about is the bottled in bond, and this is just the regular version. That's a liter, and I think I paid $12 for it. So it is not an expensive bottle of bourbon. But what's interesting, and the reason I wanted to show this to you, is because this bottle of bourbon actually has a connection to both of these that I am tasting today. It has a connection to Old Forester because this has been with Brown-Forman for quite a few years, and Old Forester is with Brown-Forman. But also, it has a tie with Yellowstone, and the tie that it has with Yellowstone is a man named Minor Case Beam. And if that last name sounds familiar, yes, he was part of the famous Beam family that Jim Beam was once owned by, and now, of course, it's owned by Beam Suntory. But what's interesting about this tie is that if you've listened to episode 9 and 10 of season 2 of Whiskey Lore, you already know the answer to this story. Minor Case Beam was actually working for Early Times when he decided to kick out on his own as a master distiller. He met up with a guy named Francis Head, who had his eye on a distillery in New Hope, Kentucky called T.J. Pottinger, and so he went in and bought T.J. Pottinger's distillery, which was right next door to what was the Yellowstone, or would become the Yellowstone distillery, which was Cold Springs Distillery, which was owned by J.W. Dant's son. This all gets very confusing, and if you go to Limestone Branch, you'll learn a lot about, by looking up at their board, all the ties between the Dants and the Beams. But what happened with MC Beam, Minor Case Beam, is that he was working with Francis Head at Head and Beam, and then Francis Head retired, and it became MC Beam Distillery, and then after it was MC Beam Distillery, they sold to Taylor and Williams. Well, Taylor and Williams is also who J.B. Dant, the son of J.W. Dant, went to work for, and then became the president of the company, and then bought the neighboring distillery from Minor Case Beam. So in the end, Minor Case Beam is the connection between Early Times and Yellowstone. How about that? That is your history lesson for today. All right, let's get into doing some tasting on these two whiskeys. Now, as you can tell, the Old Forester Honestly, I bought this about 2 weeks ago, and that's how much I liked it. And actually, it's kind of unfair that I'm putting Yellowstone up against it at this early juncture because I do have a minor obsession with this Old Forester 100 at the moment. I'm sure that obsession will start to fade after a little bit, but I am enjoying that bottle, and I'll have to get another bottle here sometime soon for $25. I mean, that's a pretty good deal. I paid a little bit more for this one. I want to say I paid 32, I think, for the Yellowstone. It's not been in my store, so when I saw the bottle, I said, yes, I've got to go get it because I've had it at Limestone Branch, which is the distillery that makes it. And Limestone Branch, like I say, is an interesting place to go because Steve and Paul Beam are descendants of J.W. Dant and Minor Case Beam. And so they brought Yellowstone back to the family, and they are making it there at the Limestone Branch distillery. The other controversy about this, staying on history for a second, is that this says since 1872. As you'll hear in the podcast episode, I don't know, because 1872 was the year they opened Yellowstone. But the details I've seen in the books say it may have been closer to the 1880s, maybe, when they started making Yellowstone. So I'll dig into that one of these days. I'll find out the true answer. But right now, I'm going to start off by, and look at that, I got a Whiskey Lore, glass there, it's a little hard to see. I'm not sure how to show that to you where you can see it. Well, anyway, just got these this week. Really excited to have them. Oh, man. This is a Yellowstone. And I get some baking spices on the nose this time. And there's a little leather in there that I pull out. And when you first nose this, you'll pick up this ethanol or solvent kind of smell, but it doesn't linger long. You can smell a little bit of the rye in there. Just the sweetness of the rye. And it's got some nice legs on it. Let's check that one out. This has a really nice mouthfeel to it. It's interesting. It's pleasant in your mouth. The flavors don't come flying forward. There's a little bit of a citrus in there, and I get more of that rye spice, little pepper. But then this dark chocolate hits you as it's getting towards the finish, which is really, really nice. And then I sat there for I don't know how long trying to figure out what that last thing I was getting on the finish was. And sometimes we come up with some unpleasant sounding things. I was like, reminds me of foot odor a little bit. And then I started remembering that Fritos remind me of foot odor. And then they got me the corn. Okay, there's a corn. Yeah, there's a corn in that. So don't let my foot odor thing throw you off. But for some reason, I get some Fritos in this. I'm going to pair some Fritos with this and see how it goes. I like it. I really like it, and I think that's a bottle that I will continue to work on. I also noticed it had kind of a squeaky pop on it. It's got an interesting kind of flat cork on it. Notice it has kind of a little scraping thing, but it still has a nice little pop on the cork. I'm going to do a podcast episode or maybe a video around my favorite pops on a cork. This one's not going to win for best pops on a cork because it is a screw top. All right, so we're going to go for the Old Forester now. 100 proof. Difference between these, this is 93 proof, that is 100 proof. Both of them are aged at least 4 years. This is not a bottled in bond 100 proof. Sometimes you start seeing that 100 proof and your brain goes straight to bottled in bond. But I guess the difference being that this was not stored in the government supervised warehouse, and so they don't get to put the bottled in bond on it. But for all intents and purposes, it sounds like it's pretty much similar to what a bottled in bond would be. So those, again, very, very similar bourbons in that respect. And color is very similar between the two. I put them on a 0 on that Walker scale. This one comes at you with a little bit of ethanol also on the nose, which is interesting. This one you pull in a lot more of like the caramel and toffee kind of. The vanilla comes out. And somebody told me that if you add some water to this, it's going to pump up that vanilla. So I will do that here in a moment. But actually, before I drink it, one of the weird notes that I pulled out of this one time while I was smelling it was processed meat. I smell bologna. I'm not picking it up this time. But I put that in my notes because I wanted to remind myself that that was there. Otherwise, a very fragrant whiskey. But yeah, that ethanol kind of pops in there. This one is a little drier and a little more spicy than that one is. And there's a lot going on with this one. Almost too much for you to really get it in one taste. Every time I taste it, I get something different, and I think that's part of the reason I like it. I get some cinnamon in there. Again, actually more the red hot kind of cinnamon. A little orange zest in there as well. So this is the one I wanted to try, diluting it just a little bit. You guys had a pretty clear winner between these two. And I think I do too, but I would buy either one of these. Maybe a little more of the vanilla comes out, but yeah, no big change with the water for me. Maybe I need to keep experimenting. I'm going to have to get another bottle because I'm out of that one. Black pepper on the finish. You get a little bitter, a little oak, and some coconut that comes through on that. Both are clean as they finish. That's probably a little cleaner on the finish than this one is. But there is nothing to argue about with either of these two whiskeys. I think they are both very good. And I love the story behind this one. But I'm gonna stick with my Old Forester. You guys picked this one 70 to 30% over this one. But I think either of these would be fine in a collection. I don't think you would be disappointed with either one of these whiskeys. I will say though, $32 versus $25. Back to get another bottle of that pretty soon. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave me comments, and would love to hear what your thoughts are on these two different whiskeys. If you've tried them and what you think in terms of flavors and things that you pulled out of them as well. And go check out the Whiskey Lore episodes. It's season 2, and it's episode 9 and 10, talking about New Hope. A fascinating place. They're opening a new distillery there called Log Still Distillery, which is related to the Dance. And there's a big water tower there that says Dant Family. So I just found that region fascinating because they used to have 9 distilleries pre-Prohibition. And then there were no distilleries for many, many years, and now they're coming back to the area. The Dant family is returning. So check that episode out when you get a chance. You can find it on any podcast app and just look for Whiskey Lore. And until next time, enjoy. Cheers. Sláinte.